Welcome to the Visual COBOL in a Nutshell series of presentations. This module covers object code formats within Visual COBOL. I would like to start the presentation with a question. So, are you confused yet? Native code, managed code, objects, .NET, JVM, these terms are frequently overused, misused, and misunderstood. For instance, a common misconception is, I cannot move my application to managed code because I would have to convert my existing procedural COBOL programs to use object orientation. Is this statement true or false? Well, it is absolutely false. In fact, most existing procedural COBOL sources can be recompiled and run as managed code with little or no changes at all. Let me try to shed some light on exactly what is meant by native code and managed code. One definition of native code is machine code that is executed directly by the CPU that targets a particular processor. A definition of managed code is an intermediate bytecode that is interpreted by a virtual machine which is independent of any particular computer processor. So native code targets a specific computer architecture, so we can say that the code generated is native to that processor. Managed code compiles to an intermediate format, which is run or managed by a virtual machine and can be made available across a wide range of platforms. So the term managed code defines the underlying environment and has very little to do with the source format of your COBOL programs at all. Let's take a closer look at the object code formats that are supported within Visual COBOL. There are three main classifications of object code formats that are supported. The first one is the Micro Focus proprietary format known as int or gent code. The second category is called native code and refers to system object code which is linked into an executable format by the system linker. This is also known as unmanaged code. The third category is managed code format. Visual COBOL provides support for both the .NET framework under Windows and the Java virtual machine running under a variety of different platforms. First off, Micro Focus proprietary format. Both the int and gent formats are included for compatibility with older Micro Focus COBOL releases. We recommend that for new development projects that you use either native code or managed code instead. Int code is intermediate code which is interpreted by the Micro Focus abstract machine at runtime and is largely portable across Micro Focus supported platforms. Gent code is generated native code which targets a particular CPU and tends to be quite a bit faster than int code. Both int and gent formats compile as one source program equals one output file, and both must be run using a trigger program such as run.exe on Windows or cobrun under Linux and Unix. The usage of int and gent code can be seen in this diagram. Depending on the compiler directive used, either int or gnt, you can generate the appropriate format. Either format needs to be run under the Micro Focus runtime system in order to be executed. Both Visual Studio and Eclipse IDEs have support for generating both int and gent projects. Native code in Visual COBOL refers to object code which is generated for a particular processor and operating system that is then linked with the system linker in order to produce an executable file. Under Windows, this refers to system.exes and DLLs. Under Linux and Unix, this refers to executables or shared objects. Native code objects can be generated for either 32-bit or 64-bit systems. A single native code executable file can contain many different object files compiled from COBOL sources or from other languages such as C, which produce the same object file format. Because these executables are in a standard format, they provide for direct access to Windows APIs or to Unix system calls. This diagram shows how .obj files from multiple sources can be compiled and linked into a single exe or DLL under Windows. Likewise, under Linux and Unix, .o files from multiple languages can be linked together into a single executable file. Both Visual Studio and Eclipse IDE have support for native code projects. Visual COBOL supports two managed code formats, .NET Assemblies and Java Bytecode. .NET Assemblies contain code in Common Intermediate Language format and run under control of the Common Language Runtime, or CLR, under the .NET framework under Windows. These assemblies can easily be integrated with assemblies generated by other .NET compilers, such as Visual Basic .NET or C#. .NET assemblies can be generated for both procedural COBOL programs as well as for object-oriented COBOL classes, providing full access to the extensive .NET framework of technologies. .NET assemblies can be generated directly from the compiler, and full support of .NET project templates is provided within the Visual Studio IDE. Java bytecode can be generated as Java class files that can be run directly under a Java virtual machine environment. Because they are standard class files, they can be run side by side with class files generated by the Java compiler. JVM bytecode can be generated for both procedural COBOL programs as well as for object-oriented COBOL classes, providing full access to the extensive Java framework of technologies. JVM class files can be generated directly from the compiler, or full support for JVM project templates is provided within the Visual COBOL for Eclipse IDE. So first let's take a look at what this looks like in .NET. You can have source programs in any .NET language that will be compiled into a common intermediate language code known as CIL. These assemblies will be stored with the extension .exe if it is a main application, or .dll if it is part of a class library. When these assemblies are executed, the .NET Common Language Runtime will be loaded, which will then invoke a just-in-time compiler to compile the class as native code and then execute it directly. For managed code in the Java virtual machine, we see a very similar structure. Code from either Java or COBOL can be compiled into a common intermediate language file known as bytecode. These files will be stored with the extension .class, or they can be packaged into a jar or Java archive file. They can be executed by loading them into the Java runtime environment, where they will be either interpreted or JIT compiled into native code and then run. Let me show you a quick demo of Visual COBOL object code formats. So first I'd like to show you what the compiler can do from the command line. It is capable of generating any of these types of objects directly. I have a little batch file here that I'll run to demonstrate this. Okay, we have a simple source program called hello-cobol.cbl. It contains one display statement and a stop run. Okay, if we compile this using the COBOL command with the int directive, it generates an int code. If we run this using the run command under Windows, you can see that the application displays the hello COBOL message. Okay, if we compile it instead with the gnt directive, it generates a gent file. We can run this in the same manner using the run under Windows and execute the program. Okay. For native code, you can specify the exe or DLL name as the file output, and it will both compile the source program and invoke the system linker to link it to an executable format. Here we can see a .obj was generated by the compiler and a .exe was generated by the linker. This can be run by executing it directly, hello cobol.exe. Okay. For managed code type formats, you can use the ilgen directive to generate .NET assemblies. That generates either an exe or DLL extension, depending on the type of assembly that you desire. Okay. That can be run directly also by just typing in hello COBOL. That will invoke the Common Language Runtime under the .NET framework, which will load the program and execute the IL code in the assembly. Okay. Under for Java class files, you can generate those using the JVM gen directive. We can see that that has generated a hello COBOL.class. And in order to execute these, you can use the Java command. Here's Java hello COBOL, and it runs the application just as it did in the for the other object code formats. This is the same way that you run a Java class file using the Java command. Okay, that's the command line from the IDEs. In Visual Studio, under New Project, we have a number of project types under COBOL. All these different project categories all generate managed .NET assemblies except the native type projects. Native will generate either a Windows application, which is a graphical EXE to run under Windows, or a console app, which is a character-based EXE, or a link library would be a DLL if you want a DLL to be generated from your project. Okay. Also supported under native is Microfocus int.gent format. Let's create an int.gent project to show what that looks like. Visual COBOL will automatically generate a default set of properties for your project that are tailored for that type of project. Here we have our output type is set to int or gent. You can see the other output types. You can set other project options, such as the platform target. You can set that to 32-bit or 64-bit. It's capable of generating either object code format. Okay. The default for an int.gent project is to generate int code. If you wanted to compile to gent instead, you would click this option here, compile to gent, and then gent code will be generated for your project instead. Okay. For native object projects, we can select a console application under native. And if we look at the properties here, we can see now it's set to a console application, and we have an additional option to output to either a single executable or multiple executables. What this means is, in a single executable, if you have a number of different programs in your project, different source programs, they'll all be compiled as individual objects and then linked into the same executable with the name of the project. Okay, if you say multiple executables, then each of those source files will end up being its own EXE, given the name of the program itself. Okay, under the COBOL tab, again, you have the x86 and x64. Okay, for manage code, notice that all the project types are all created the same way. Here you just select under manage, and we can select a Windows form application, and that will create our manage code project and present us with a form that we can start designing. If we look at the properties under that, we can see it looks a little bit different. It has now given you an assembly name and a target framework for the type of .NET framework that you want to target in your application. Under COBOL, under platform target, there's now an additional option, which is any CPU. Since these are generated as intermediate level code, you can specify any CPU, which tells it if you're running on a 32-bit machine to run it as 32-bit application. If it's a 64-bit machine, it will run as a 64-bit application. Okay, you can see there's no link tab for an assembly for a managed code project because they are not linked, they're generated directly. Okay, so that's Visual COBOL for Visual Studio. Visual COBOL for Eclipse, you have your project types under the File New option. You can see you have a COBOL JVM project or a COBOL project, which means native. Okay, JVM project meaning manage. So if we create a COBOL project, and we'll just give it a project name of native, that will generate our project. If you look at the properties by right-clicking on that and selecting properties, under the Microfocus option, under Build Configurations COBOL, We can see this is where we have our options here for the platform target of 32-bit or 64-bit, or whether you want a single executable file where all programs will be linked together, or all executable files where each individual source will create its own executable. Okay. In the Eclipse version, you don't have a separate template for int.gent. You can select it here. And if you want to create a gent file, because int is the default, you can further set a option below, compile to gent, and then GNTs will be generated for your programs. If you don't want int or gent, you would just want a native object, you would just create single executable or multiple executables. Okay, so that's native. For a managed code in Eclipse, you would say COBOL JVM project. And we see that we now have options for which Java runtime environment you would like to use when running this. Okay, if you look at the project properties, you can see they look a little bit different. You no longer have the output targets or different executable formats, because a .class file, Java.class file, will always be generated for any type of COBOL JVM project. Okay, you do have some additional options for setting some unique features to Java for the JVM, such as the JVM build path. Okay, so that's the support under Eclipse. Some of the benefits of using managed code are a new object-oriented COBOL syntax has been introduced, which greatly simplifies the coding of object-oriented programs and classes within COBOL. Utilizing managed code provides you with seamless integration with the extensive set of classes available in those managed environments. Managed virtual machines handle memory management, providing features such as automatic garbage collection to help reduce memory leaks and simplify programming tasks. Using managed code also allows you to compile once and then run anywhere there is a virtual machine implementation for true platform independence. So, some frequently asked questions. Does managed COBOL code have to be object-oriented? Absolutely not. Can I use Oracle Pro COBOL with managed code? No, Oracle Pro COBOL can only be used with int.gent or native code. This is because Oracle has not developed a managed code version of the Oracle Pro COBOL product. You can use OpenESQL, which is a Micro Focus precompiler for embedded SQL statements that supports managed code with ADO.NET providers in the .NET framework and JDBC drivers for the Java virtual machine for Oracle. Can I use the DB2 external compiler module with managed code? No, the DB2 ECM can only be used with int.gent or native code. Like the Oracle Pro COBOL product, IBM has not developed a managed code version of the DB2 ECM. Again, you can use OpenESQL that supports managed code with ADO.NET providers for the .NET framework and JDBC drivers for the Java virtual machine for DB2. Are the NetExpress, Server Express, OO class libraries available for managed code? No, OO COBOL programs that access the Micro Focus class libraries, such as Base, GUI, OLE, or Java under NetExpress, cannot be run as managed code programs. If you're using OO COBOL with managed code, you should be using the frameworks of the environments themselves, the .NET framework or the Java virtual machine. That brings us to the end of the Visual COBOL in a nutshell presentation of object code formats. Thank you for watching and happy programming.